I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. Later, we'll dig into the New York Times College Rankings tool. But first, in the 2022 midterm elections, Republicans picked up 3 seats in the House of Representatives from New York State. That helped give the party a narrow majority in the House in Congress. In the same election, Lee Zeldin came a close second to Kathy Hochul for governor. After the election, New York Republicans sought to build on those gains. They sought a new state party chairman and recruited a former one, Ed Cox, who headed the party from 2009 to 2019. Ed is joining us again today, and welcome back. Jesse McKinley and Nicholas Fandos reported in the Times not long ago that Democrats haven't won all 4 offices, haven't won statewide since 2002. Obviously, Republicans haven't. Democrats outnumber Republicans of the state in terms of enrolled voters. But why have Republicans not won in New York?
Well, it is a very Democratic state. It's a blue state. And we actually did win the Senate, state Senate, year after year after year, until 2018, when we just didn't do well in the suburbs. Got wiped out in the suburbs for national reasons, not for domestic reasons. So the Democrats now have not only the governor, but they have both houses of the legislature by supermajorities, which gives the governor, Democratic governor, fits, because there's no house that will uphold her veto, and that's necessary for her to get her program done.
There's no one to blame.
No one to blame, but we as Republicans, we are united in our minority here. We are really strength in where we stand on the issues. It's very straightforward. You know, we're for safe streets, good jobs, and good schools. And you think, well, isn't that common sense? Wouldn't the Democrats be for that? No. I mean,
But they're not against safe schools.
Well, wait, hold on.
Or are they?
Mike Gianaris from Queens, he killed 27,000 good Amazon jobs in Queens that would have made per person more than 100,000. They also killed in the southern tier use of natural gas. Only state that has natural gas in shale and that isn't using it. Southern tier is in poverty. They are more for their ideology than they are for basically good jobs for an economy that's really thriving here in New York. Good schools. The leaders in the state legislature have put a collar on our mayor here, saying you only get two years of mayoralty control. After that, we'll decide whether we like you or not. And by the way, you ought to do this and this because the teachers' unions want it that way.
Kind of holding the mayor hostage.
Yeah, and they have a cap on charter schools here. And charter schools are the best schools in the city. There are lines waiting to be part of the lottery, to win the lottery so that they can be in the charters. And they're denying those kids good schools. So they're not good for good schools. Safe streets, forget about it. I mean, it's quite clear. Lee Zeldin ran on the crime issue, and that was a huge issue in the city and in the suburbs. So yeah, no, they are not for good schools, good jobs, or safe streets.
Speaking of safe streets, Alvin Bragg, who the Republicans have denounced, is he a criminal? Should he be disbarred, as some of the more outspoken Republicans have said?
No, but his case is a very, very weak case.
Against Donald Trump.
Against Donald Trump. It rests on a misdemeanor here in New York that normally is settled with a fine or something. And the 2-year statute of limitations has passed 5 years ago. So that doesn't work. So in order to make it work, he brings in a federal which also may be subject to the statute of limitations. But looking at that's the Federal Elections Commission, and it just doesn't fly. In the end, that issue, the federal issue, normally is settled with a fine too. Mrs. Clinton just settled that with the Russia thing. She paid through legal fees, something that really went to politicking. And that was a fine, and they fined her for it, and that was the end of it.
Do the National Republicans care about New York in a presidential race? In a presidential?
Sure. You said we picked up 3 seats. No, actually, the Democrats tried to gerrymander us here, and they actually did.
They got greedy.
According to the Brennan Center, we would have been limited to 4 seats under their gerrymander. Now we have 11 seats. The difference is 7 seats. They want to get some of those seats back. And those seats, because they are drawn by a special master, because we, our group, challenged the Democratic gerrymander, we won that. A special master redrew the seats rather than going from completely no competitive seats at all.
Now the Democrats want to reverse that in court.
They want to, well, they want to reverse it in court. They'd rather cheat than compete. And we just say, okay, let's compete. And they're going to have an advantage in a presidential year because more Democrats show up in a Democratic year in a blue state. And they would have a good shot at winning some. We're going to fight. And that's the way it should be. There should be competition. But they want to fix it again, so they have this case that really has been thrown out unceremoniously by a Democratic judge at the trial level. It's now at the appellate division, and the Senate has tried to rearrange the highest court, the prestigious court, the Court of Appeals of the state of New York, which is known as one of the most prestigious common law courts in the United States, if not the world. And they are now trying to get their judges on who would, in fact, approve that Hoffman case, and so they can re-gerrymander for 2024. It is not the way we should conduct ourselves here.
Ed, would Donald Trump, as a Republican presidential nominee, help you or hurt you in New York State in terms of holding on to those congressional seats?
He does very well in the red states, not so well in the blue states.
Like New York?
Like New York, that's right.
So who would help most at this point?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say. In the end, I think we have to fight it out on our own here, and we have to start, which is why our group that beat that Democratic gerrymander, and it's been a large group, has just moved in to run the state committee, Republican state committee, so that we can do the things that are necessary in order to defend our congressional seats, and also to break their supermajority in both houses of the legislature. We need to have a real two-party system here in New York. It's going in the wrong direction. Where I started, they don't have common sense policies.
As the governor said, she might be thankful for that.
They're not for safe streets, and you need to have, yes, exactly. Any governor would, to have common sense Republicans there in a position to be helpful.
You're married to Richard Nixon's daughter. Do you find it ironic that people are referring to you as a Rockefeller Republican?
Well, Rockefeller was actually a pretty good governor, but it's a different era now and different needs. But we do need to have a two-party system here in New York.
Are there any Rockefeller Republicans left in New York? Is there a liberal Republican Party?
Actually, you know, Nelson Rockefeller was known for his edifice complex. He liked to build things. Well, guess who just did a lot of building of things like LaGuardia? Andrew Cuomo. He had an edifice complex also. So you might say he was a Rockefeller Republican. Depends what you mean by a Rockefeller Republican.
Well, how do you define it?
The Rockefeller was sui generis, so I don't think he applies really to any ongoing issues.
Good answer. How would you describe yourself politically? Conservative? What?
I'm the chairman of a party that is a party of, we got a big tent, and we will have the full spectrum here, and we want, because people are just for common sense policies that I cited at the start. Anyone who's for those policies and against really a party that's running Albany now with supermajorities that's run by the Democratic Socialists of America, because they won these primaries against independent Democrats who are more moderate. So all the leaders are running scared of having a primary on themselves. So their policies are way out on a limb for policies that are not good for New York with respect to schools, with respect to jobs, with respect to safe streets, and that makes them vulnerable.
For decades, we've had so-called minor parties, liberals, working families, conservatives, pulling the two major parties in different directions. Should we have those minor parties exercising the power that they do today, or should we eliminate that?
Well, Andrew Cuomo kind of obviated that when he changed the rules, and you need to have a larger portion of the vote in a general election in order to maintain a third party without the cost of petitioning.
Right.
So I don't think we're going to have. I mean, there are two established. There's a Working Families Party on the Democratic side, and we have the Conservative Party that generally goes with the Republicans, and that probably will not change because those are fairly entrenched parties.
Mm-hmm. And how do you now attack the Democratic Party on statewide races? That's not a problem this coming year, but it will be soon enough.
Well, on statewide, you're right. And again, it goes back to common sense policies. We're for common sense policies, and they are not. And that's the way we're going to campaign.
Where is the Republican strength in statewide races? Upstate, suburban? Any chance in New York City?
Well, we have, just looking at congressional districts, we have 3 congressional districts upstate that are generally Republican. Not rock solid, but they are generally Republican. But we are gaining strength with the Asian community. With respect to the education issue, the Chinese community won it on merit. They work hard, their families support them, they do very well in education, and they find themselves excluded. That now in New York City schools, merit is downplayed in the name of diversity, and they feel that's discrimination against them as much as there is discrimination against Jews way back when, in the 30s and 40s and 50s, because they were very capable, working hard, and they were excluded. That's why CUNY became known as the Jewish Harvard, because a lot of these students were kept out of Harvard, and they thrived, and they are some of the top intellectuals in the country.
Thank you to Ed Cox, the past and future and current chairman of the New York State Republican Party. And coming up next, college rankings from the New York Times. Welcome back. The well-known U.S. News and World Report college rankings used by millions of parents and students around the world recently faced a crisis when Columbia University professor exposed his own school's faulty data. A closer look at the college rankings elsewhere revealed that the focus was heavily on exclusivity and resources. With this backdrop, the New York Times has created our own college rankings tool with more of a focus on price, diversity, academics. When using a specific ranking system, this tool placed 5 CUNY colleges in the top 10 in the country. Joining us now is Quoctrung Bui, Deputy Graphics Editor of the Opinion section at the New York Times, who played an integral role in creating the rankings tool with Jessica Ma. And what he created in this tool is not a sort of objective list of which colleges ranked first, which ranked the top in different categories, but which ranked the ones that you as a college student or as a professor would be most interested in from your perspective. So how does this work?
So the tool's very simple. You have a set.
That's easy for you to say.
Yeah, well, you have a set of sliders, and they range from incomes of the alumni, academic quality, graduation rates, whether or not you want to go to school with a strong athletic program or a strong social life, and price, of course. And so the students are allowed to kind of toggle between these different priorities and see what ranking best fits their priorities. So for instance, if I were a student that mostly cares about making a lot of money and I want to do it at the lowest price possible, then I could set those as my most important priorities, and I would get a ranking that would surface the schools that would cost very little but yield high earnings. And those schools tend to be like engineering programs, programs that are very heavily skewed towards the sciences, right? And then you could also filter for different regions. Say I live in the Midwest, and I want to do that only for schools in the Midwest. And I would get a ranking specialized for schools in the Midwest. And so it allows students to get a more flexible view of the world as it is, rather than this kind of idealized world of like this kind of like idealized vague notion of like what the best school is, because it really doesn't really
This
apply
makes
to most
it
students.
the best school for you.
Exactly, exactly. And that's what we really wanted to focus on when designing this tool.
Where is the pool of data from, and how accurate is it, and how often does it have to be updated?
The pool of data mostly is from the government. The government actually, the federal government, Department of Education, actually collects very fine-grained, detailed data on every university, from income, from debt, price, and then there's other notion of net price, which is the price you pay after, families pay after merit grants and financial aid. And so that's the data that we use for kind of the harder stuff. And then for the softer stuff like athletics, sports, and social life, we used data from this group called niche.com, which based their data on student surveys.
Mm-hmm. What are students interested in most, do you think? Or does it totally vary?
There is some variation, but we actually did a survey with Morning Consult to figure out what students actually wanted. Mm-hmm. And what came back is it was actually pretty simple. Students want to make a lot of money. They want a school that costs a reasonable amount of money and doesn't put them in a huge amount of debt. And there are certain things that we were surprised by. So like going into this, I was expecting students to say, I want to live close to my family. I want to go to a school with a very strong social scene. And there wasn't that much agreement among the students that we surveyed. It really came down to price. It really came down to income. Those are the things that students, by and large, across different demographic groups, tend to care about.
We talk a lot about racial diversity, even economic diversity. Do kids care about that as much as the colleges and universities seem to care about?
No, not at all.
Maybe they should, but
maybe they should. But in the survey, those details were at the bottom of the list. Even among students of color, those criteria ranked a little bit higher, but still, it was by and large income and price.
And what about humanities versus the so-called STEM subjects? Are the humanities dead?
That's a very, very loaded question.
Yes, it is.
I don't know, and I'm not qualified to answer whether or not the humanities are dead. But I will say that if you look at the composition of majors that students graduate with, it is very clear that the humanities have become a minority among the majors that students graduate with.
So if you're correlating people who want to make a lot of money, chances are they're not going into the humanities.
Yeah, that's probably true, yeah. I think a lot of the students are very much interested in going into computer science, medicine, statistics, technology. Those are the jobs that we have come to promote as good paying, solid jobs. The government has had a strong hand in this with the promotion of STEM fields, so it's not surprising that students are headed that way.
What's been the reader reaction to the college tool?
By and large, very good. I think the students are very, very happy to have a tool that kind of sidesteps this whole other universe of rankings that they've been traditionally reading. It allows them to more flexibly find schools that they never would have otherwise found.
And this covers large, small, medium schools too.
Yeah, we have almost 900 schools in the sample. And we did, I'll be honest, we did, since we're in the opinion section, we did put our thumb on the scale a little bit. We filtered for schools that didn't do a good job of graduating college students. So schools that didn't do a good job were not included as in our ranking because the college dropout crisis is a very big deal in this country, and we didn't want to promote schools that didn't.
So you held them to some standard.
We held them some standard, because the amount of data actually available, number of schools that are quote unquote in operation in the United States, is quite large. And so if you don't do some sort of filter, then you might end up with results that don't make much sense because the school isn't really qualified to teach students. And so we did a little bit of that. But I think the students were very happy, administrators were very happy with having a different sort of take on college rankings, you know.
Were you surprised at how some schools did, how well they did?
Yeah, I mean, the CUNY system did really well. I was very surprised by that. I actually had to double check the numbers several times. I was like, this is something, I was worried that there was something off, but it turns out that the numbers were quite right. And actually, the fact that some CUNY schools rose to the top was further validated by other research, notably Raj Chatty's research on economic mobility. And in his research, he also found a number of CUNY schools to be very good at taking students from the bottom of the income ladder and putting them to the top. So,
did you get any reaction from the schools that didn't do so well in this?
Not really. The most negative reaction we got from schools were schools that didn't make the cut on the list in the first place. Some schools that had low graduation rates, or schools that, you know, were too small. We had a filter for schools that were too small, and very small schools were kind of mad. And maybe that's a criteria that we would revisit later on if we did update this piece.
And where can you find the tool? On nytimes.com?
If you just Google New York Times college rankings, you get it. It's the simplest way to do it.
All right, let me ask you maybe a silly question. You went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison. If you were applying today and used this tool, would you wind up picking the same school, do you think?
You know, this is the fun game with this tool, because most of our readers probably graduated from college already. And so everyone's trying to find the school that they're trying to reverse engineer the tool to find the school that they went to. And for the most part, when I reverse engineered this tool to find my school, to find Madison, it actually did quite well, and it fit my values pretty good. Like, I wanted a school that was low in price, that had decent economic outcomes, that was in the Midwest, because I grew up in Wisconsin, and that had a good social and athletic scene. And particularly when I cranked up the athletic scene and social scene, my school really rose to the top.
So it worked.
It worked for me.
Good. Thanks so much for joining us, Quoctrung Bui. And coming up next, my thoughts on crime and Congress. Oh, the hypocrisy. This past week, Ohio Republican Jim Jordan led the House Judiciary Committee on a field trip to Manhattan to talk about crime. Not what the federal government could do about gun control, nor about increasing Washington's contribution to better trained cops, or about the precipitous decline in benefits from the federal budget to build affordable housing. Instead, Jordan and his fellow Republicans were vexed about the $5,000 or so in federal funds that Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg included to finance his investigation and indictment of former President Trump. By the very title of their hearing, the Republicans implied that those funds would have been better spent to assist victims of violent crime. Consider this, though. If you lived in Lima, Ohio, where Jordan has a district office, your chances of becoming a victim of violent crime are about 1 in 155. In Manhattan, your chances are 1 in 192. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Republican congresswoman from Georgia, has been another fierce critic of the Manhattan district attorney. She represents a mostly rural district. The closest city is Marietta. Marietta is safer than 11% of American cities. Manhattan is safer than 15%. The murder rate in Manhattan is about 4 per 100,000. In Atlanta, near Congresswoman Greene's district, it's nearly 32. Also, whatever you think of the former president or the incumbent district attorney and their policies, a prosecutor can only pursue cases that the police believe they have solved. They do a remarkable job. But 30 to 50% of the time, you can get away with murder in New York and never get to court. When Ms. Green and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis complain about crime in New York, remind them that perhaps Congress should conduct a field hearing in their states to explore the findings not long ago of a national report. It listed Georgia and Florida as the states with the most lax gun laws, laws that allow interstate trafficking of firearms used to commit crimes. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.